We are very pleased to be joined by the general manager of the San Jose Barracuda, Joe Will. Joe, first of all, thank you so much for the time. How is the offseason treating you?
Oh, it's been great. It's kind of been one continuation, getting ready for an exciting draft and development camp and free agency period.
Well, it seems like there's no offseason when you're in the front office of a hockey team. You lead right into the summer, and you've got the Stanley Cup playoffs. Everybody's keeping their attention on, but you've got the draft, and this is a huge point in the history, really, of the San Jose Sharks. You have not picked in the top five in a long, long time. I think the last time was Brad Stewart when the organization selected him third overall. I want to say back in '98. So this hasn't happened too often. So it's a big draft for the organization, and I'm sure there's been a lot of prep and a lot of that has gone into it. How do you feel? You're in Nashville currently, kind of getting ready for the draft. For you personally, how are things going? How do you feel about what's pending in the next couple of days?
Just very excited because it's, I think, the first time we've had the entire staff together, from our development staff to our pro staff and amateur staff. Everybody's here getting ready for their different segment. The amateur scouts are doing a great job, led by Chris Morehouse and Scott Fitzgerald. They're getting ready for the draft, and it's not just picking number four, but it's 4, 26, and 36. Having three picks quite high in this draft and 12 overall picks. We're really excited.
Before we dive into the draft, there was some big news for the Sharks organization. They had a nice tease on social media with Patrick Marleau, and it was announced he's going to become a development coach. And to have a guy like that in the organization is critical, the type of career he had and the type of person he is as well. And for him to stay in the area and stay within the organization is a huge get. From a Barracuda's perspective, what does that mean for the prospects? Should we expect to see Patty on the ice a lot working with some of these guys?
Absolutely. I mean, he just loves the organization, and he loves working with young players and just kind of, giving advice and being a mentor. And, that's what we're going to see from him. I think he's going to help out wherever he can. I think there's very few guys could be mentors, not just to NHL player or AHL players, but to NHL players as well. I think just Patty being around and the professionalism and, all the nuances of the game that he knows, he's going to help everybody, myself included. Just from his insight and vision.
In your mind's eye, how important is it to have ex-Sharks stick around in the area, make their roots in San Jose? Because that is what Patty has done. His family lives in San Jose. His kids are playing within the Junior Sharks program. How valuable is that for growth of hockey in this area?
It's huge because as we know, Patty has the four sons, and a lot of our other alumni have young kids that are playing sports, and a lot of them playing hockey. So they help the youth programs just by being around and coaching, within there, and helping out within there. But they also just being around the organization, showing that they want to remain in San Jose. As we're recruiting and trying to retain athletes here, they say San Jose is a great place to live. Look at, we've had a great time here, but we want to stay here after we play. And, seeing that with the number of our players, it's very bullish. And as we're going out looking at free agents, that really looks good for the organization.
Speaking of the organization, you issued bona fide offers to 6 players from that 22 class. So last year's draft class: Eli Barnett, Mason Bopit, Michael Fisher, Jake Furlong, Reese Lawback, and Joey Muldowney. For people who are not quite familiar with what a bona fide offer is, can you kind of explain what that means?
Yeah, it's just a way to keep a player's rights longer after you draft them. So it's any player that plays in junior. It's traditionally the Canadian major junior leagues, but also in the U.S. junior leagues, just as a kind of a safeguard to make sure that there's no loopholes and player can go through and end up becoming a free agent on there. If we issue them a bona fide offer, we get to retain their rights at least 1 year, and oftentimes all the way through the end of their college eligibility. So it's something that we have to do every June 1st, along with the signing deadline of some players as their signing rights. If they're Canadian junior players, major junior players, the rights expire in 2 years. So we have to sign it by June 1st, or they go back in the draft, as we saw with a few of the players. But that's commonplace. You never sign all your draft picks, and we signed a few, and we let a few go at that point.
This is a discussion that's a lead in to the 23 draft, just a couple of days away in Nashville. What are you most excited about this upcoming draft?
I think it's just kind of, filling spots in the organization, that we've been just kind of waiting to do. And we knew, it's sometimes we have the plan in place, but it takes events like this to actually transfer the picks into an actual face and a body here, and finding out who's going to be available, and knowing that we're going to have great players at a lot of those selections of, when we get done with this and we go to development camp, we're going to say, wow, look at this, group of players that we have. And we're going to be, deeper at all the different positions, and have a lot more talent, right in front of us. So it goes from just being a numbered draft pick to an actual body. That's what we're really the most excited about. And then seeing the timetable, they're 18 years old. It's very rare that they're ready at 18 or 19 or even 20 years old, but at least the clock then starts ticking.
The draft affords an opportunity for all the scouts who put in all those hours, those long car rides, flights, watching players in random little towns, to get together and really enjoy themselves. And the fruits of their labor is seen in front of them. It's tangible. You select players, players join the organization. How fun is it to get the entire scouting group together?
Oh, it's great. And the draft day, it's their day, as opposed to game days where it's the players and the coaches and such. It's really their day to shine. They put in the work. They've driven through snowstorms to go and see these games. They've went to the players' homes and visited with the families and their teachers and their coaches to get all the backgrounds, and they're very proud to come in now and give us their lists, and hammer out an overall list and putting everybody in order. And then as we select guys, as they get to go down and put the jersey on them, and that's my favorite thing, is just watching how proud the scouts are. It's a culmination of their work for the year, and they do a great job.
Well, the NHL's doing everybody favors since post-COVID, since remote drafts. You've been in Montreal and now you're in Nashville, arguably two of the best cities in the entire National Hockey League. I know you've been to Nashville over the years. Is there a place you've always got to go whenever you make your way to Music City?
You know what? I just I love walking down Broadway and listening, and then I'll hear something that sounds interesting because you can hear all the music, and I'll go in and watch that, and it reminds us a little bit of hockey. I mean, this is where all the music scouting in the world kind of goes on. So it's ironic that all the scouting goes on here, and all the blossoming stars have to go through Nashville. So we see a little bit of that, but it's an unbelievable place. Kind of come down, and first thing you notice is all the cranes going up and everything. They're just it's growing so much here. It's great to have, again, another non-traditional or southern hockey market that's just thrived. And as we know, it's been great to see since 1991 when we came in the league. All the other markets that came in the Sun Belt.
You mentioned those artists, a lot of those artists performing on Broadway, they're trying to catch their break. And it's kind of similar. There's some parallels to some of these young players that are trying to work their way to the National Hockey League. They need to be drafted first, but then there's a development process there. So there is a little bit of a connection and hope, I guess, for an organization and maybe for these musicians as well. It just seems like a fitting location to hold an NHL draft. We all see kind of the energy and the banter that goes on from afar over usually a television broadcast on the floor, on the draft floor, GMs on the phone. You've got the logo of your team and all the brass kind of sitting around in a circle. What is the draft floor really like for those who have never been on it?
Well, I mean, the draft floor, it's you're ready with your list, but then there's a lot of moving pieces. You might a player that you had slotted at a particular spot might go. So you might say, well, I'd like to move back and get two picks. Or you might be excited about somebody that's still left and you want to move up. So you're constantly thinking about pick trades. And on the other hand, there's players that are moving because free agency is July 1st. And so there's teams trying to clear moves to clear players to sign a free agent and things like that. So they're calling around and saying, you know what, I need to move this guy and I'll move him for a pick. So you have players moving, you have picks moving, you have everything else going along with your best laid plans that you have. And then at the same time is is you make a pick, but you pick 10 picks later, and right about the time you're ready to pick, your player that you picked is coming down and shaking hands with everybody at the table. So it's a very active spot. So it's nobody ever gets bored on at the draft table. It seems like a long day, but there's an awful lot going on.
You've been with the Sharks since the beginning. You've been to a lot of these drafts. I don't know if you can pick one, but I'm going to ask you to. What's the most memorable draft in your time with the organization?
I think for us, really, I think the 2003 draft, and actually right here in Nashville, coming back, and that was the pick where we took Milan Mahalik at 6, and we had some good players going there. Joe Pavelski went in the 7th round, very memorable. It was just there were so many good players that came through the 2003 draft. I mean, that comes to mind. Our first draft that we had. As well, and in Buffalo, and going up and taking Floon and Whitney and Ozelinch and such. That was a big one for me as well. So they're all unique and special, and that's the thing about the league here. We're seeing other leagues kind of up their game with drafts, but the NHL has always been the number one league as far as I'm concerned. Is what they've done. They've included fans. They've went city to city. A very very fan connected event, and that's what makes our draft so special.
You mentioned '03. You mentioned the first. I've been looking at a lot of previous drafts in the Sharks history, and that first draft, a pretty good draft. I think if you take 3 players with your first 3 picks that play in the NHL, Falloon was your first selection. I think he played over 500 games. Then Ozelinch was a second-round pick. Whitney went later in the first round. So if you get 3 players who end up playing 500 plus games, that is an absolute home run of a draft. And they're talking about this draft as being quite deep as well, right? This is expected to be a pretty deep draft, and it's a good thing you've got multiple first rounders and an early second-round draft pick to take multiple swings at the plate, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we're excited about that. And until we actually make the pick, it's kind of draft capital. You can move up and down and around, but just again to be in the top 5 in a draft like this, it's very special. And we're excited to have that opportunity and make the best of it.
We're talking to Barracuda General Manager Joe Wilson, GM for the Sharks. I want to add some context by going back to last year's draft. Your first round draft pick, Philip Beested, you signed him earlier this offseason to his entry-level contract. Had a great year last year in the SHL, was named the Rookie of the Year. How do you guys feel 1 year later about Philip's development and where he is at as a player?
We're very excited. The fact that he went through and he was the Rookie of the Year, and that's playing against older players, and what he did in the World Junior Championship. He's just continually grown. He not only shows some production, but he shows all the different center qualities that you like. He's got an awful lot to his game, and with the size, as you see him, he still got the kind of baby face and baby body going, which is exciting to us, meaning that he's gonna grow and get bigger, and he's already got a pretty big frame. So he's going to go back and be on the World Junior team this next year, play a higher role in the Swedish Hockey League, and then even at the end of the year, possibly come and join us at the Barracuda or Sharks. That's an option that we'll have now that he's under contract. Who knows what happens, but that's an option.
How do you weigh that decision? Because there could be a scenario similar to William Eklund. Now, they're drafted at different points in the draft, and that kind of changes, I guess, the philosophy and decision making. But how do you land on a decision on whether to send him back to the SHL, back to Sweden, or have him play here in North America, potentially playing for the Barracuda? Now, if he were to play over 10 games, that burns one of his years on his entry-level deal. So we'll see how that shakes out. But how do you kind of weigh those options, AHL or going back home?
Well, it depends on situation. In this particular case, is Philip is going back to the SHL. I mean, nothing is ever for certain, but in talking with him and his representatives and everything else, that was something that they looked at for the year, and I think that we're good with. So we'll see him at development camp, but he's likely to spend this year in the Swedish Hockey League, and we feel that that's going to be very good development for him. So, but there's other players, including maybe who we take with their first pick here. You never know; they could come in and be in that situation, and all you try to do is just they usually tell us by their play, and it's kind of attrition. You start out with easier hockey at the rookie tournament, then you go to the NHL camp, and then you have NHL exhibition games. and then the final games of the NHL exhibition, it's harder competition and everything else. So that type of attrition, going through that in training camp, does a guy hit a wall or not, and go on. And very few players. I think each year there's a handful. It's 5 to 10 players that are 18 and 19 years old that that play in the league. That's because it's so difficult. But they usually generally do come from players that are in the top 10 selections.
You traded back last year. You were at 11. You traded back. You took Philip, as we mentioned, late first round. That allowed for a couple of additional second round picks. You take Cam Lund, who spent last year at Northeastern, and you took Matthias Havelet, who was actually Philip's teammate over in Sweden this past year. Those are high draft picks, not number one picks, but almost late first rounders in a sense. How do you feel about both those players' years last year? Now, fast forward a year later after being drafted.
Yeah, just they both had great years. Cam Lund came in and he, got a lot of ice time, got a lot of experience as a freshman in college hockey, a true 18-year-old freshman. So that was great for him. And for Havelit, he was injured for quite a bit of the year. So he missed the World Juniors, but then he came back, had a very strong second half, and we felt he had a very good year as well. So we're excited. He's on the same team as Bstad, so we'll be able to see both of them, and probably both of them at the World Junior Championships, barring any injury or anything else unforeseen.
And Cam Lund has a chance maybe to make Team USA's World Junior Championship team as well. So that'll be good to see him on that type of stage if he is to make that team. A couple of days away from the draft, how does the next 2 or so days shake out for you and the rest of the scouting staff?
It's just a lot of meetings. It's everybody being prepared. Everybody came in prepared. And now it's just getting together in the room instead of Zoom, and being here, and it's a lot that comes down at once. You have the draft, you have the free agency, you have contract signing period coming up as well, and you have the development camp. So it's very exciting, and we'll come out of this in the next week, you're knowing a lot more about our team. We'll know the players that we've drafted, players that we may have got through free agency, who may be still here, who may be elsewhere, and then being able to get a glimpse of them at development camp. That's all going to happen very quickly, and then there will be a little lull until we could get to training camp. But looking at that too, that's only a little more than 2 months away.
You mentioned it, 12 picks in this upcoming draft. Sharks haven't done that in almost 2 decades as well. So you've got a lot of swings at the plate, and we've talked about this over the last handful of years. But having 12 picks, does that give you, in your mind, the ability maybe to maneuver the draft a little bit, or do you guys expect to try to use as many of those picks as possible?
Yeah, I think most drafts that we've had, we've always made some moves, and the moves can be, again, to move up, to move down. We go into it just not knowing. It really depends on other teams and who they select. And sometimes we even move up picks into other years. Say, at this point in time, we've gotten players that we want. We'll move it into next year, so we have that pick. And picks are currency. They're not always just picks to get a player in that particular draft, but they could be moved in trades, and we look at that as well. So that's kind of our bank account, and we look at it all the way along. And so I would expect that it's not going to be all 12 picks as they sit right now, that there'll be some type of movement, but which way and how that goes, time will tell.
So first round and beyond, how does the philosophy change from that opening round to maybe the subsequent rounds, from a pick need of a player or a certain position or best player available? Does it change from round 1 to the later rounds?
I think you always have an eye on what the organization needs, but at 18 years old, it's going to take a while for those players to get there. So, I think that there's some, again, you keep an eye on it, but the focus quite often is best players available, because you just don't know when they're going to get the maturity, and by that time, maybe what the organization needs today might be totally different 4 years from now. So we kind of keep that in mind. So we look at everything. We go through and we we look at, is it a position of need, a position of value, everything along with there, or is it just a darn good hockey player that we want to take, and we'll overlook a couple of things within there. I think that all kind of comes into play.
In your mind, what makes a Shark? What parts of their makeup make a San Jose Shark?
I think it's just a competitive, infectious type of player that really, as we were so spoiled to have over the years, with Patrick Marleau, with Joe Thornton, with Joe Pavelski, Logan Couture, Brent Burns, Dan Boyle, Douglas Murray, Ryan Clough. It's just, the list goes on forever of players that we had, and it's kind of that selfless, competitive players that play to go into the playoffs, play for the organization, and pass it along. And that's it. And that's the beauty of having, Patty coming back into the fold, and the other players that we have, and Mike Ricci and Evgeny Nabokov, is just selfless. They're giving back, and again, showing that they put the organization before themselves, and that's what we want. Players that'll put the organization first. Um but having, some organizations don't have players like this around, and alumni like this that can show the young players this is how you're supposed to do it, and have that type of street credibility and everything else, and our guys do. So at the end of the day, that's what we want. Along, again, not at the same time, you do have to have talent. We have to have talent. You have to have scoring, and you have to have, ability to play. It's National Hockey League, best league in the world, so you have to do that. But at the same time, is just that selfless ability.
Last year's draft, you basically took every position. You took wings, you took centers, you took D, you took a goaltender. What is a specific position that you just can't have enough? You're going to have 12 picks this year. What's a position that you'll continue to go back to the well for?
I think really just, honestly, everything, because we look at it here too, is there's a age distribution. So you have to look at, you might be set at this position, but some player may age out, or his contract might term out on there. So it's really to go back and look, do you have a progression? If you have a great 28-year-old defenseman, well, do you have somebody at 24, and do you have somebody at 20, and that are kind of understudies, that when the one guy becomes either too expensive, or elects free agency or something like that somebody will kind of, the succession to go up into there. So it's really to have, a wide breadth of assets at all positions.
Watching the Stanley Cup final, seeing the way that Vegas was constructed, the way that Florida was constructed, does that influence any decision making on specific types of players?
They're both very competitive. That there's some size and grit with the playoff type, and that always helps. You see on there why, Florida's very competitive, very playoff type, and they're able to go through with a lesser regular season, but then win into the playoffs, because that's kind of how they were constructed. So, just players with that extra grit and playoff ability, are really worth their weight, and that's, and have unique value. So that's kind of what we learned, from the playoffs.
We're talking to Joe Will. Last year, Mike Greer came in really right before the draft began. Doug Wilson Jr. basically conducted the draft. This time around, Mike has assembled his front office. He's brought in staff. This is going to have his fingerprints all over it. Has anything changed from years past, or is it kind of status quo, just rolling along here? Same type of process leading into the draft?
No, quite a bit has changed. I mean, Mike came in, and Mike is very inclusive of people, and he's got some great, advisors with Doug Wade and Tim Burke and Tom Holy and Chris Morehouse, Scott Fitzgerald, Todd Marchant, amongst others. Patty coming into the fold, and there's an awful lot of people within there. He surrounds himself with great hockey people, of all different backgrounds and in different areas, and that's what I've been really impressed with, is just the group of advisors that come in, and the team that he's put together. So he's put together a staff that much like a hockey team, that filled different needs that we've had within there, and he's looked at some areas to upgrade the team, upgrade the staff, just to kind of follow trends that are happening around the league. So it's been exciting for me, somebody that's been here for a long time, and that while I think he's taken the continuity of the Sharks, the best parts of the Sharks that we've had as a staff, he's added in areas that have needed to be added to.
Well, continuity is the word because many of the scouts, area scouts, have remained intact. There wasn't a ton of change from a scouting department standpoint. Now, advisors, as you mentioned, added, and other folks in more of a front office role. How important is it to have that consistency and that continuity amongst the actual scouts, boots on the ground, guys going and seeing players?
Yeah, it really helps. They know what they're doing. It's much like a veteran player. They not only know what they're doing, but they can help others. And so as you get into the meetings, it's not awkward. Everybody knows what they're doing. They're professional. They come with their lists, they're ready and everything else. So that's what we have. There's not a lot of change, and well, there's some change in procedure and protocol on there. The scouts are still extremely professional and know what they're doing, so they come in prepared.
All right, free agency starts on July 1st. So you've got the draft, you've got development camp, you've got free agency. It's a whirlwind. We saw last year you bring in quite a few veteran players that played quite a bit with the Barracuda, kind of carry the torch, help lead the way for these young players. Do you expect this year to look to bring in guys who are NHL players, certainly have played games in the NHL, but also can help at the AHL level?
Yes, we're looking at free agency right now, and we're going to be adding some players. Generally, in the American League, there's a lot of one-year contracts, so players will move on, and a lot of times that's opportunity based for them. It's a lot of players that are kind of trying to find their best fit, so they'll come and try it with us for a year, and then they'll move on to somebody else, and we'll be the benefactor the other way. So I do expect a little bit of turnover. Generally, those are 1 year type players that have some upside and some good AHL experience, and probably some NHL depth experience. So I think we'll see a little bit of change within there. And then for the Sharks, again, we keep an eye on the market and say, if something's good for us, if it's a great fit, if it works for us as the cost, as far as financial and any other type of cost, we'll certainly look at all opportunities.
Looking at the Barracuda, again, this is a Cuda-centric podcast of sorts. Last year, the team didn't reach the playoffs, but I thought there was a lot of good things that transpired. There were a lot of young prospects that got their feet wet at the professional level in North America. What were your overarching thoughts of last year's Barracuda team? Now, disappointing, there was no playoffs, but what were your overarching thoughts on the team as a whole?
I think the team grew throughout the year. I think they had some adversity of injuries and all of that early on, and just growing as some young players. And I think at the end, I think if we would have had another month or so, we would have probably solidified into the playoffs and probably given whoever our opponent was a pretty good run for their money. So I think we're kind of growing in that, and that was exciting to see. It's always good to see young players like Gushkin and Bordelot and Eklund and such, Monk Medulin coming in, amongst others. Those players growing and getting better as the season went on, surrounded by other players that kind of helped them, and that's what we're the most excited about. And that's in the American League. That's all you try and do is just get the players better year to year. I think we're going to see over the next few years is that we'll have more players going into the Barracuda. I think the lull, the years that we had where we didn't have first round picks or move some picks and prospects and such within there. That's we've seen in the Barracuda the past few years. We haven't had the same amount of probably first, second round players and such coming in, but that's changing now as we're going and the past few drafts and that. So I think we're going to see, we kind of hit in the COVID year, probably hit our bottom of the cycle, and it's probably coming up from there.
One more question for you. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Bryant Marchment. It's essentially the 1 year anniversary since his passing last year, and it's still very, I would say, sensitive and a tough subject for many in the organization because he was such a a polarizing person and such a nice person away from the ice and post-playing career. As you reflect on Brian and his life, what's something that you remember about Mush?
I think just how much, he loved the game of hockey and loved the organization, loved his teammates, and such a giving person. And he's just he's missed to this day. It still hurts tremendously, and it's hard to believe it's been a year. And we think about him all the time. It was really good to see his son Mason have such a good year for Dallas. He was so proud of him coming up and getting better in National Hockey League and earning that contract with Dallas. So he's in our hearts always.
A year, it seems like yesterday. It's tough to bring it up, but I appreciate the comments about him. We miss Mush, certainly. Joe, thank you so much for the time. Best of luck in the upcoming draft. This is an extremely exciting time for the Sharks organization. There's just no doubt about it. Thank you for the insight. Best of luck though, as the next couple of days transpire, and we'll be watching.
All right, thanks, Noli. We're excited.